Hey everyone, it's Ellis, and this is going to be the patron Q&A video that I'm now doing as part of the same tier as the Clash and Solo Queue tier list that you can get available on the Patron. Started offering this as a reward, and this is going to be something that I'll do probably once a month, where you can ask me pretty much any questions that you want to, and then the highest upvoted ones at the time of making the video is going to end up being the ones that I'm going to answer. Obviously, for this one, this is the first one that's being done. I hope that in the future I can have like a proper camera setup and I can do the question somewhere else that is not just sitting here at my desk or something. And I think in that way it would be probably a lot better visually than whatever it is appearing as right now. So I just want to get right into it and get straight to the questions. And again, anyone can ask me pretty much whatever you want. Obviously, if you ask something way too personal, probably not a great chance that I'm going to answer it. But let's start off. Acrive asked, what are positions and jobs in esports, whether it be in orgs, broadcasting, etc., that are needed more of or are underappreciated? So one of the things that I think is super important in esports teams that is currently lacking is therapists or psychologists in some sense. But one of the things that I actually thought of when I was doing the T1 series earlier on this week, it was Week of Legends or something, is I actually touched on the topic of psychologists and therapists and teams. But one of the things that I've realized, being a person that has had dozens of different therapists and shrinks over the years, from early childhood through adolescence into even adulthood at certain points, is that there's not a one size really fits all, and that's a very scary thing when you're dealing with players or staff that have wildly different personalities and might not respond to the same kind of therapist or psychologist or something. So that's actually a tricky subject that I think I was very quick to fire off as a suggestion and talk about in the past, but actually dwelling on it a lot more in recent times, I think I've realized that it becomes a lot more difficult to assess in that regard. And I think that trying to find someone that fits that bill is going to be difficult, but I do think that it's something that is necessary as esports continues to progress. For the next question, we have Nanaki45. He asks, did you ever play any Final Fantasy game? If yes, which Final Fantasy was it? And if many, which is your favorite? So my ID originally was actually derived from Final Fantasy 3 on the Super Nintendo. It was Shadow was my favorite character. And so when I was originally playing StarCraft 1, my ID was actually Shadow, but when I tried to make the accounts, all variations of the word Shadow were taken, and thus I ended up making the ID Last Shadow because there was a player named Last Gosu. And I just liked the idea of like last, and I sort of thought of it as like a Reaper, or like as like a anti-hero type character in my mind. That was basically my idea of it. So Final Fantasy 3 was definitely my favorite. I've played Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 1. I played Final Fantasy Tactics. I played 7, 8, 9, 10. I've played 10 2, and I think that's it for all the Final Fantasies that I have ever played. But I definitely think 3 is my favorite, and then after 3, I really do like 10, but I love the card game in 8. I didn't like X2 whatsoever, and I liked 7, but not more than 1. It's weird because 7 wouldn't even be in my top 3, so I guess that's kind of interesting. I think as like a final conclusion to this, I one of the characters that I also really like is Vincent Valentine. I know that wasn't a part of the question, but he was one of my favorite characters from anything growing up. Okay, next we have Bob Lazett. He asked, what helped you learn competitive macro to the point that you've learned it? Any good places to find resources on the ideas and the nuances of things taking place in competitive amateur and programs? So, when I initially came to League of Legends, I thought most pro teams were slow, and I thought most players were really bad at looking at the game. And I think that I gained all of this from mostly StarCraft, because StarCraft as an RTS is about resource management, and it's about making conclusions that are in the best interest of the overall goal, which is to win the game. And so you're in that game, you're going to have many different parts of the map that are separated. You're going to have different armies that are across the map, and you're going to have to make decisions that again are in the best interest of the game. And I think that in this regard, we can also look at it in a League of Legends sense, where certain champions or not characters, but players should be willing to take knees at certain points inside of the game for the overall benefit of the team or the hive mind. And I think that even today in in Pro League of Legends, we don't really have that. I mean, we don't have laners manipulating lane states relative to jungle paths. We don't have junglers identifying lane states correctly. A lot of things are still very arbitrary. Draft is still very misunderstood. I think if you go back into my YouTube videos in 2014, you'll still see me harping on about some of the same topics that I'm talking about today. And so if I was 6 years ahead then, I'm still pretty worried. I hope in coming years more things become more understood. I think itemization is one thing that is becoming a lot more understood, and I think that itemization is a thing that you can understand on how to optimize, and you can look at it in a practical sense. And I think that that skill set is something that carries over from many games. It's not like a MOBA thing. You can find it in RTSs, you can find it in trading card games. I think video games ultimately, they're all everything at the end of the day is just pattern recognition. But one of the analogies that I've always used is if you go to an island and the island has never seen a car or an airplane, and you ask people of the island to imagine a car or imagine an airplane, imagine electricity, they're probably going to have a pretty hard time doing so. And so people that have only grown up in League of Legends, they've only played that game, and if the staff only has ever played that game, they've never played a game at another high level, they're probably not going to identify patterns that might have been present in other games, or they might not reach the same conclusions in a similar manner. And I think that that can be one of the reasons for slowness inside of the scene. Kimmerix asks, hello LS, you've been in the scene for a long time. It'd be interesting to know how you were able to really get in-depth information for the game. How do you know which and why a certain champ outscales another one? I mean, I have a rough idea, but I would like to go in-depth and know exactly why. How do you think one learns such knowledge? So, I feel like I just touched on this in the previous answer. A lot of it is pattern recognition and understanding what goes into the identifying of such a pattern. When you come across something inside of the game, you want to basically identify it, and rather than attempt to justify it from its origin, you want to try to attack it to see if it actually stands up to what you believe it to be. And in a lot of instances, you can find that there's a lot of fault in conclusions that are very present inside of the scene right now, and you can consistently try to attack and deconstruct a lot of beliefs that are held inside of the game. And when you can do that, or you can find openings that might exist for alternate situations or alternate itemization paths, alternate runes, etc., you can begin to consistently keep testing them, and then you can see the results, observe them, and then test them, and then do the same exact thing to those results, and you just keep doing that in a circle, and then you reach an end conclusion. I think it's not a very simple thing. Obviously, in my early years of League, I played a massive amount of League of Legends. I mean, I've been playing games my whole life since I was 2. I've been playing competitive games at a semi-professional or higher level since I was 12, so I think that this is kind of a unique thing, perhaps, where I've just been so immersed in so many different games and genres that pattern recognition to me is maybe a little bit more morphed than it would traditionally be. And I think that for someone cannonballing straight into the pool or something, it's probably going to be a bit overwhelming. But one of the best things that I can suggest to do is obviously get high MMR. And then when you get high MMR, you possess, hopefully, a level of skill sets that allows you to start to attempt to reverse engineering beliefs that are present about champions or build paths or rotations or anything, and then you can begin attacking them and looking for alternatives that can maybe exist, and then perhaps finding fault in their ways. I think that Max is a really good example of this. Max is someone that probably a lot of people that watch my videos know about, and I've recommended him as a coach. He lived with me for 2.5 years, shadowing me. When Max first got to Korea, he was a Challenger 880 LP, North American top laner. He was coming off of Academy for 100 Thieves, and he flew out to Korea. When he was in Korea initially, he was Diamond 4, Diamond 3, hundreds of games, couldn't really win any of his lanes playing top, and I ended up getting, really frustrated at him. But through a lot of repetition and experimentation and trying to attack and understand why, and then breaking down his beliefs that he understood concepts because he was a Challenger North American player, and trying to go deeper into other areas, I think that his perspective of the game changed as a whole. So I think that's pretty much it. Hey Les, I'm what people call a hardstuck bronze silver, as I've been around there for about the past 5 years playing casually. I haven't found success in other games I took more seriously either. I remember in some of your older videos you mentioned coaching hardstuck bronze silvers and how you noticed that a correlation to disabilities, physical, mental, learning, etc. I have ADHD, which is a learning disability. I do too. Although I recall learning certain things and understanding things way faster than other kids all throughout elementary and high school. Do you have any update on your observations you'd be willing to share publicly? So, this is obviously a pretty sensitive topic because of the nature of the question. When I made that comment on Beyond the Rift, it was in my own subjective experiences as a coach and doing thousands of hours of coaching publicly and lots of OPGGs and lots of OPGG conversations, which I don't do those anymore because I do Blitz GG. But basically, what is something that I notice is most people, if they commit hundreds and hundreds of hours to something, even playing casually, generally you tend to develop skills that allow you to slowly realize that you're wasting time or you're not being efficient at certain things. If you go and wash the same dishes 100 times over, you're probably going to find different methods to just do them quicker. You're going to find different ways to wash them faster, dry them off faster, place them in a better manner, etc. And you're going to do that pretty much unconsciously because you get bored at such a mundane task that you start realizing like, okay, well, I'm obviously not doing this efficiently, and it starts to become like a habit, or it starts to become like a mini game that you start doing. And when people can't do that, or when they keep playing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games or thousands of games each season, and they're looking up EDU content and they can't climb, I, in my experiences, have thought, okay, well, maybe there's something there, and almost every single time there often was. So again, it's entirely subjective. I don't think ADHD is really an excuse for being that kind of MMR. I have ADHD. I know lots of people that have it that are also high MMR. I think that's more of a cop out, especially if you're like managing it with like medication. Even if you're not managing it with medication, there's definitely alternate ways that you can get through stuff. And I don't think that it should be limiting you to the extent that you're experiencing this kind of difficulty inside of the game. So one of the things that I think is probably going on is that whenever you're just playing on autopilot, you might take long breaks in between the games. You might play a wide array of champions. It's really hard for me to know without seeing your Blitz GG or having interacted with you ever. I think reaching out to someone for like verbal sessions can obviously be good. I don't think I mean, obviously following a tier list is one of the most easy things. It's actually one of the things that I try to do with my tier list as opposed to other public tier lists is I try to think about what is most practical for people to actually climb with or get better at certain MMRs, and then obviously at Diamond Plus as a breakpoint, start thinking about that practical nature and combined with the intent to win. So I'm not sure what could be going on with you just through a text-based question. I do think it's alarming if you're experiencing that kind of difficulty because I'm a person that genuinely believes that pretty much anyone can get to the MMR of like diamond something if they're just actually applying themselves, because I don't think that platinum or gold is necessarily like a very special thing, because platinum, gold, silver, etc., they're ever changing as the game continues to exist. You don't need to learn everything that you learned in or that people learned in season 3, season 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You just need to learn what is good now, and you need to understand that the fundamentals aren't changing. So as long as you're progressing or you're moving at a similar speed as other people at that MMR, you tend to be there. And I like to liken it to applying yourself in other areas of life. And if you do that above average compared to other people in your social circle or something, then you will end up at a similar tier. Obviously, some people are going to have a knack for certain things over others. And I think that the earliest examples that I can cite for this is like obviously in high school. Everyone remembers the kid that slept in class and yet got straight A's. And there was the person that would always go to the department nights and get tutoring and stuff, and they would still struggle and get C's. I think even in that regard, there's something going on there. But no matter how much you're struggling, I still think that you can get a above average grade in a game or something. I don't think there's really a reason not to. Okay, on for the next question. Liam Quadfast asks, do you feel negatively impacted by the bad performance of Fnatic? I don't feel impacted in the way that maybe you're suggesting, as in, do I feel bad that the public is making the meme like I ruin Fnatic or something like that? I think that's ridiculous. I've spoken out about it many times in that once scrims resumed for LEC, I pretty much didn't talk to Nemesis for like 3 weeks or something. I still lived via the games and I would chit chat after some of the games with him, but in their drafts and their gameplay and so many of the games, there was so many things that I would obviously very clearly dissent against, and it goes against all the things that I talk about. So more often than not, it was actually the absence of things that I say. So I don't understand how the public and certain people can correlate me and the ruining Fnatic comment. Okay, moving on. Jackster says, "Will you sometimes do a champion tier list for team play?" I actually already do that. I think if you're asking this question, you actually have the Clash tier list. So that's actually designated for team play, but not for amateur and pro play. Amateur being National League or Academy League or something like that. And even then, I think that pro play would have to be separated into region, which is really interesting, but that's a topic that I've been talking about on stream, I guess, for quite some time now, especially in some of the co-streams. But regardless, I don't think it should be that way. It's just that it happens to be that way, and it's an unfortunate reality. Zevrov asks, "Hey LS, I really like playing jungle and I would like to main the role in solo queue. However, you typically recommend people to play solo lanes until Diamond Plus. Thus, last season I played Annie to D4 promos. This was late into the season and I failed to reach D4 due to having to focus on school. If I were to play jungle this season, would it be equivalent to relapsing on fast food, or should I try to make it into Diamond this time before doing so? Regardless, I plan on sticking to the tier list. My goal is to learn the game fundamentally. Shout out to Rhode Island from Connecticut." Okay. Connecticut is a nice place, okay? We're not going to talk about Rhode Island, though. So, about relapsing onto fast food or something, I think the whole reason that I tell you to tell junglers to play solo lanes is because it is the equivalent to not learning any mechanics. It's like playing Yumi or something. When you're playing Yumi, your mechanics are significantly stunted. You're not really learning about spacing. You're not learning about positioning and all this other stuff. You're basically learning ability casts and all this other stuff. And I think that I liken this to jungle. I compare it to playing an MMORPG and just playing a class that only presses 2 buttons and runs around, doesn't have any kiting features or anything else going on. Jungling allows you to attack stationary targets, and even there, people fail. I mean, it was just yesterday we saw a Karthus clear 30 seconds late in the LCS on a Karthus leashless clear. Now, obviously, that's a gross example, but what I'm basically saying is that a lot of people lack the fundamentals of the game, and by handicapping themselves by playing a role that doesn't require them to stress those mechanics, it's equivalent to not working out certain muscle groups and then expecting muscle growth. Obviously, you can still get muscle growth by not actively working or stressing certain muscles, by working on muscles like around it or something like that, but it's going to be 100 times harder, and that's the problem. Most people lack the ability to discipline themselves to do something in the first place, and when they end up going into jungle, it doesn't make that much sense because they're missing out on so many core fundamentals of the game. So hope that analogy makes sense to you, and that's why I don't like people playing jungle when they're low MMR unless they're autofilled, in which case just follow tier list champions and get free wins. Jungle is pretty much all math and learning how to clear optimally and then playing that on autopilot until you get again to an MMR where you have to start actually thinking and working with your teammates. But below a certain MMR threshold, which I would say is like Master, Grandmaster Plus, everyone's pretty much an NPC. Now, when I say NPC, I don't mean they're literally an NPC. I mean they should be treated as such. You should treat the game as if you're a speedrunner and you're getting 4 randomly generated NPCs every game that are just going to make your speedrun either more difficult or more simple. And you should only be focusing on yourself pretty much in all of the games. Okay, Emily asks, "Are there any good resources out there for learning how to draft 5v5 comps for things like Clash? When to pick poke comps versus wombo combo comps, etc. Thanks." I don't think that there is. Drafting's a really hard thing to talk about in general. I've spoken about this a lot on some of the co-streams, especially with Max. There's the TSM Draft Dystopia video where I go into it for about 2.5 hours, but you would need... I feel like it's possible to talk about drafting for weeks on end and really having to get into why and when you pick certain champions inside of the draft. I think a lot of the drafting segments that we're doing in between the LCS co-streams recently with Max and Nemesis give a lot of insight into some of the difficulties and considerations that have to be made for certain picks on like B1, R1, B3, R3, B4, B5, R4, R5, etc., and why you ban the way that you do. It's really, really hard. I think the TSM Draft Dystopia video, I think other draft videos that I've made over the years are pretty good, but it's just a lot of very difficult content to make in a digestible format that allows people to easily learn how to do it rather than know it. Knowing and understanding something are two entirely different things. When you only know something and then the variables change, you don't understand how to reproduce the result, and that's where the problem lies. Alex Vogel asks, "Hey Les, do you have mentioned some of the Academy House to train proper coaches, analysts? Do you have any idea when that will come into action? I suppose it's still a faraway goal, though I would be interested if there's any time frame we can look forward to." I have no idea. The startup for it is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I imagine to even get the ball rolling, and so that's obviously going to be a very big hurdle. The problem that I also have to encounter is figuring out how and where it's going to be. We're currently in a pandemic with Corona, and there's so many other obstacles that are currently up. It's definitely a far out project. I've talked with many people about trying to start it up, but there's so many logistics that go into it. And right now, the only people I can actually think of that could even be present at the initial academy would be myself and Max. So that's obviously a bit of a horror story. Okay, so this was it for the Patreon Q&A video. Obviously, most people were only asking me about league-related things for the most part, but I think that's totally fine. You can pretty much ask me whatever you want again, and the highest upvoted comments are going to be the ones that I try to answer, unless I feel like I've already answered the comment in a previous question, or if I just feel like the question is maybe already answered or provided somewhere else on the Patreon or somewhere else on the stream or something. Maybe I can just reply to the comment instead, or Michaela can do it because obviously she is a part of this Patreon now as well as all my other socials. So that's pretty much it. The next Q&A again will be done towards the end of the month, and then it'll come out at the very beginning of the month every single time. It'll be uploaded onto YouTube, I believe unlisted first, and then it'll be released publicly. And that's pretty much it. So if you want to get access to this, you also get the Clash tier list and the solo queue tier list and the ability to participate in the Q&A video. I think Michaela is adding other perks. I'm not entirely sure, but we're trying to keep most things pretty simple, and we're just, listening to feedback, and Michaela is going to be adding more, changing things up, and making things a lot more digestible. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and that's it for the first video.